The last couple weeks has been very active for announcements that affect real estate. One being the Bank of Canada meeting last week, and two being the federal budget that came out a couple days ago. Today is April 18th. Federal budget was April 16th. Bank of Canada meeting was last week, and there was no change. This is the sixth straight Bank of Canada meeting that they've held the overnight rate. What does that mean for real estate, and what does it mean moving forward with Canada CPI numbers coming out today at 2.9%? How do we unpack all of this? There's a lot of information here.
I sell condos, Denny. I don't know how to interpret all this stuff. It's a lot, but some of the announcements definitely impact real estate, like the capital gains side. But where do we want to begin?
Let's maybe just quickly touch on Bank of Canada. There's not a lot to report. The rate, like I said, stayed the same for the sixth straight meeting. There's a lot of speculation that rates are coming down as early as June, potentially through the summer. Any thoughts or new information that we've received that could lead us to believe rates are going to drop this summer or fall?
I think one little key tidbit I listened to recently from someone that's smarter than me in this space was that there still is an expectation or an anticipation of rates coming down. And, let's call it 50-50, whether it's June or not. But long and short of it, even if rates do come down, the thought is that the 5-year fix will have a minimal change until maybe next year. So like the fix, what I'm curious to see is if rates come down, it's going to help a few variable mortgage, like us that carry variable mortgages a little bit for a short period of time, but we're not going to really see relief until the years ahead. Say it comes down 0.75 of a basis point this year. The thought is that the 5-year fix may still not be adjusted, and that will give a little relief to variable mortgage holders, but there's not going to be a lot of lending. Like we're still going to have high mortgage payments. There's not going to be a lot of, we're not going to see a big change until next year or the future years, So I don't know. I don't know what to expect, but I do think that if they did, reduce rates in June, we've had a few years of a summer lull. It might be a good time. It might not stimulate the market in a crazy summer environment. It's still a weird market out there. There's not, by transactions, we're still a little bit slower than past years.
Yeah. Our next podcast will be spring market update and kind of talk about sales ratios and what's happening through Greater Vancouver. But maybe just like a quick summary of if we do see a June rate drop, do we think that will spark activity in any way, or is it going to be too small? Like you just kind of said, more relief is needed for market activity to pick up significantly. And let's say we see a price run in Greater Vancouver. Does that not happen until next year? 2026?
I mean, I think there's still a lot of people that can't afford to move. So my guess is future years are going to be busier than this year. But it might bring a little more optimism to those that can afford to move, that are sitting on the fence. That's something. I mean, I don't know what you're seeing clients do right now, but are you seeing people go with a 5-year fixed, a 2 or 3-year fixed, or a closed variable?
I'd say most people right now are not going 5-year fixed. They're going 2 or 3-year fixed, or recently I've had a couple people going variable just in the anticipation that rate will come down. And then maybe in 12 to 36 months, they will reassess and lock into something if and when rates drop.
Yeah. So I think for me, when I look at the September, October deal, when that person's buying the house, I'm curious to know what the 2-year, 3-year offer is going to be at that time.
Yeah.
My guess, based on what I've listened to lately, is the 5-year offer maybe marginally better or marginally worse, but around the same as where it is today.
Yeah.
And there might be a play towards the end of the year to take the gamble on the variable again, if there's a good spread under prime and you anticipate rates or that prime rate to come down over the years ahead. So I think there's going to be a few more buyers going back to variable by the end of the year. I think the buyers are still going to choose those 2 and 3-year fixed, but that 5-year rate may not come down, from my understanding, until 2025 or 2020, well, beyond. Anyway, let's get into the budget.
Federal budget. It seems like every budget, they talk more and more and more about housing and real estate. So it's fun to kind of share this stuff and then talk about, one, the practicality of what is being shared, but two, how this is going to affect supply throughout specifically Greater Vancouver, but across Canada too. So maybe let's start with unused housing. unused government offices turning into housing?
Sure, yeah. Let's start
This
with
is
one
such
that's
an
hard to
interesting one, right?
understand.
And we're just trying to like unpack all of this information and see how is this actually going to be implemented. But like the first thing they talk about is converting unused government offices to housing. $1.1 million put into
Billion?
Sorry,
Billion.
1.1 billion. Yeah, 1.1 million is not going very far. $1.1 billion used to transform up to 50% of the federal office portfolio over the next decade. That they're planning would result in 3.9 million new homes in the next decade. How realistic is that?
Sorry, that will help contribute to the 3.9 million.
Help contribute to the 3.9 million.
Yeah, homes in the next decade.
Yeah.
Oh, jeez. I would look forward to seeing those financials after the first few projects are done, because it's a lot of money to retrofit an office building into housing. But I guess they have their experts that have done the analysis and deemed it makes sense.
One of the things Jamie brought up going into this podcast was looking at how many new homes are constructed in Canada each year currently, and to get to 3.9 million over the next decade, how many more are going to have to be built?
Basically, they have to up their annual output by 40% every year. So I think it's approximately in the neighborhood. I saw a figure of 286,000 homes being built in a given year. I don't know which year that was. It might have been 2021. You can Google it, but they need to do 400 or just over $400,000, or sorry, just over 400,000 homes a year to get to that goal. So it is ambitious. I mean, they are taking a lot of initiatives to incentivize lending for, say, purpose-built rentals.
Mm-hmm.
So we are seeing more of an uptick of developers building developments around market rents instead of, say, pre-sales.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, it's pretty ambitious to up your output 40% with the same labor force and the same, yeah. Well, the labor force is increasing, but 40% is an ambitious goal.
The other thing, talking about more money to construction, $15 billion put towards the apartment construction loan program in the hopes of building an extra 30,000 new homes across Canada. So this is lower interest rate programs for developers to use to build things like purpose-built rentals, putting another $15 billion. It seems like every single year they're putting more and more money into this program too.
They got themselves in a pinch.
Yeah.
This is the only way to create housing is to really make the numbers make sense, the financials make sense. And, especially right now with high interest rates, anything the government can do to subsidize those rates for a developer during that construction phase is going to make it much more, lucrative to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I do feel that is moving the ticker. I do think that these things do impact the amount of rentals coming to the market or being built. 40% increase from what they're currently doing is just a lot.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at how municipalities operate, there needs to be a lot of change there, which they're talking about doing with this density announcement by June 30th.
Yeah.
And then the transit-oriented development areas. It's possible. I just still see a lot of change having to happen at the procedures at the city level and also the labor force that can actually build all this stuff. It's going to be a challenge.
Another thing targeting developers to push projects through. They didn't say exactly what this is going to look like, but they mentioned a new tax on residentially zoned vacant land. Guess this is attacking developers that purchase land, sit on it for 15, 20 years, and then develop down the road. They want these projects to get started quicker.
I think their heart's in the right place. They need to incentivize developers in a lot of areas that are a detriment to a city to do something with the land. And when I'm thinking of that, I think of, say a city like New Westminster, where the main strip, Columbia Street, has a lot of old buildings that need to be developed that haven't been developed. And the consequence of that is that these buildings come up for lease, or say like the Salvation Army building becomes housing.
Mm-hmm.
But they come up for lease, but they don't really attract a good tenant because the landowner needs a demo clause. So you don't get really good businesses or great businesses coming into the street front of these main strips. So in some cities, like when I think of New West as an example, Columbia Street, 12th Street, there is a need for more investment. And having a tax for people sitting on this land will help them, incentivize them doing something with that land. But the other consequence of that is it's not just on the developers. A lot of these cases are the city's failure. In yes, developers are sitting on land that should be developed, but the city is also not incentivizing development with the zoning they have in place. So I like the idea behind the tax to encourage incentives, but sometimes these people are sitting on land because the zoning's not there, because they're sitting, lower 12th, for example, in New West, it's unknown what the potential is based on the zoning. The city wants to see proposals and applications come forward, which is hard, which involves a developer taking a lot of risk in coming up with something and investing time and money into something with no certain path of getting approval. And so, anyway, bit of a tangent there.
Yeah.
But
it specifically says vacant land though. So like, then I think, what municipalities could we see more housing due to this potential tax? And I think of like areas like Burke Mountain and Coquitlam. And
I wonder if vacant land applies to underused land. Like what if a dwelling's sitting on land that's not rented? Like there is vacant land in downtown New Westminster in that way. But there's going to be cases where it's going to be kind of feel like criminal that vacant land's being additionally taxed. And there's going to be cases where, yes, we want that to be developed because it's an eyesore for a city.
Yeah. Next thing, help for students. $155 million used for aid for rent to 79,000 students across Canada. And $1.1 billion to extend student grants and interest-free loans.
That's not really going to help housing a lot, is it?
Aid for rent, I guess, like just to help students afford living close to universities. But
so all those landlords of students around universities, Burnaby, Capilano, UBC, there might be a little bit of benefit from the rent you collect per room.
I think the biggest topic of conversation that we're going to be talking about with a lot of clients, and even personally this next couple of weeks, is the increase to cap gain. So do you want to maybe describe or define that?
I mean, that's a big one. I think that's one that you need to, we're having this, what is the date? April 18th?
18th.
And the deadline, if it goes through, is June 25th. Doesn't give people a lot of time to react. It doesn't actually give you enough time to list a property that's tenanted and give them 2 months notice and the buyer vacant possession before that deadline.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be some people in the city that have, whether they own the property in a commercial entity or whether they have a large capital or corporate entity or a large capital gain, that could right now move fast, sell their property, and get the current gain system if they close before June 25th. But you have to move fast, and it's like time is of the essence. But essentially, what they're saying is for, right now, $250,000 is the cutoff point. So if you have a capital gain in a given year, or your cumulative capital gains in a given year are under $250,000, it's treated as it currently is. So the way it's currently treated, say you have a $200,000 capital gain, half of that, 50% of that, it becomes taxable income. And if you make $100,000 a year and you have that extra $100,000 of taxable income, would increase your income to $200,000 a year, which will definitely impact your tax bill. It might, let's just use a round number of say 40 to or 45%. So currently on a $200,000 capital gain, you pay $100,000 of additional taxable income. If you have a $400,000 taxable gain, then 150 of that is above the $250,000 threshold, and they want to tax that at 2/3 instead of 50%. So there's a lot of numbers. Hard to do numbers in an audio format and podcast, but it increases your tax liability quite a bit. I don't know if it is enough to disturb your tenant today, try to get them to sign a mutual agreement to end tenancy, try to rush your place on market for a quick sale, but there is a tax. There is going to be more taxes paid for those that either incur a capital gain holding a property with a corporation, or those that incur a capital gain that's over the $250,000 threshold. I'm going to have to do some quick math on this, Denny, in my head, but what are your thoughts on it? Do you think this is going to move? Do you think we're going to see a little bit of a rush of listings or transactions in the next few weeks because of it?
There was a little bit of anticipation that this was going to be changing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of savvy investors had kind of been aware of it coming into this year. And I personally had a couple people sell properties in the fall because they were anticipating an increase in cap gain. because of the timeline, I don't think it's a huge flood of new listings, but there's definitely a list of people that we're each going to be calling this week to discuss options, right?
Yeah.
Like specifically, I have one person who's owned a condo downtown for 12 years or something like that. And she's been talking about selling. So that's a quick conversation that like, we maybe want to speed this up and try to get ahead of this June 25th deadline. It's important to note that this increase over the $250,000 limit is personal. The corporate increase for capital gain income is actually moving up at $0 or $1 to 66%, 66.6% from 50%. So the personal income, the personal capital gain is above $250,000 gain.
Yeah, and so on that note, like if you own a rental condo, like I had a client reach out about this 2-bedroom investment condo in New Westminster. His gain is in the neighborhood of, well, it could be 300,000, it could be 350,000, but it's above the 250 threshold. So if you're $50,000 above the $250,000 threshold, it basically is an increase of $8,000 more taxable income than the current system. So, $50,000, half of that, $25,000 is taxable currently. $50,000 at 2/3 becomes $33,000. So an $8,000 increase. At $100,000, it's $16,000 more taxable income.
Yeah.
So if this, you're still paying a lot of taxes regardless. But if you incur a $400,000 or $350,000 gain, essentially the difference between, and you hold it personally, the difference between this proposed and the current is an additional $16,000 of taxable income. And depending on your marginal tax bracket rate, it could be 50%, 40%. You're going to be paying in the neighborhood of, call it, I don't know, $5,000 to $8,000 more taxes. Mm-hmm. In the case where the taxable gain becomes $1 million, it becomes more significant. But it really, and if you're holding it corporately, the whole thing gets accounted. So that becomes more significant. So I could see an increase in listings or potential, some people that are very motivated to sell that have substantial gains or hold the entities corporately. Mm-hmm. The 2 weeks ahead are going to tell us a lot because you got to move fast.
You got to move quickly.
Yeah.
Anything else on that?
We didn't talk about the home buyer's plan.
Yeah. Okay.
So, but in terms of the capital gain one, I think that's going to be most of the conversations in real estate moving forward. If it happens, the home buyer's plan, the eligible home buyers can increase their RRSP withdrawal from $35,000 to $60,000. So even if a couple were buying a house, they would have jointly withdraw $120,000. Mm-hmm. So, and they're talking about extending the repayment period by an additional 3 years. So right now, if you withdraw it from your RSPs, you can take out $35,000 and you repay in 15 years. But they're talking about increasing that to $60,000, and that 15-year period would get extended by 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The other thing they talked about or announced last week or 2 weeks ago was extending the amortization on insured mortgages for specifically first-time buyers, and only if you buy new construction. So insured mortgages is when you're putting less
only
than
new construction, huh?
Yeah,
only
new construction. Insured mortgages when you're putting less than 20% down. That the max amortization currently was 25 years that you could take on a mortgage. That's extended to 30 years on insured mortgage, first-time home buyer, only new construction.
But 30 years is extended to 30 years if they have 20% down on resale, I believe. Is that correct? I just shouldn't say this out loud without double checking my facts. No, okay. All right, well, ignore that one. Carl, we'll cut that out, okay? Yeah, new construction only. Well, geez, I wonder if developers have good voice in politics.
They must, eh? Unless you have anything else on real estate, I just found one other interesting note. CBC, obviously, is funded by taxpayers. Last year, $1.3 billion was given to CBC to run that company. And this year, they're giving them an extra $42 million. Even though they've cut jobs by it was something like 1,400 jobs this year they've cut. The budget to CBC is going up $42 million.
It's all about spending more money.
Yeah.
All right, we'll leave it at that. I'm curious to see how the weeks ahead unfold and if we'll see a rush of capital gain avoidance listings.
There's a good chance.